Hi,
Hi,
Helen.
Mitch.
How are you?
I'm full. I've got a turkey dinner. Oh, Alexa, pause.
Okay, that was what I was doing that.
Yeah. I leave the music on for my cat while she's in charge.
You should get that
I
cat
think
chat.
it calms her because when I don't do it, I come home and she's very, very anxious and she meows and meows and meows.
You should get the cat channel on your TV set.
Oh, really? I didn't know there was such a thing. I used to leave the Animal Planet on for my other cats because I had one that liked TV.
So what do you do to calm your dog, Penny?
I usually give her something, a greeny treat or something. We had salmon tonight and she likes to lick out the baking dish.
Oh.
Fish is her favorite. So unfortunately, good, you haven't even started. So as soon as we start, because she's right here.
Yeah, I see. Yeah, our daughter-in-law bought a Labradoodle.
Ah. Well, this is a golden doodle, but I don't think there's much difference.
Probably not in temperament, no.
Yeah.
Yeah, they want to sit in your lap no matter how big they are.
Yes, she thinks she's a lap dog, and that's not going to happen. So, as soon as she sees Zoom or Skype when we're talking to the girls, she has to run over and be part of it. It's like having a 2-year-old. Has to be the center of attention. So as soon as we get going, should I give you your fish dish now? That would keep you busy for a while. I'm going to, okay, come on, go. Let's we're gonna get rid of you.
People and their dogs.
Yeah. So what do we have tonight?
We're going to start with Genesis.
Okay, is it Shaye or is it the other?
It's Christine. We'll do Shaye tonight, and Christine will be next week. In fact, I need my schedule.
You feel better now? Yeah. Okay.
Do you have a cat that has to be right there too?
Well, yes. She chooses her own distance. She's I got her from someone who had to go into a nursing home, and it was a long time before she'd even just sit on my lap.
Oh, geez.
So, and the poor thing, because the woman had MS, she fell, then had to go to the hospital, then to the nursing home for rehab, came home, and within a few days fell again.
So the cat was kind of orphaned.
Nurse like 3 months.
I've lost you. We've lost. I can't see. She's frozen.
Well.
Oh, there you go. Hi, Pastor Mary.
Hello, Helen.
You know what? I meant to email you today because I forgot that tuna juice.
Yes, you did.
It's in the kitchen. So just if you're going in tomorrow, just pour it down the drain.
I did toss it.
Good. Good. I got all the way home and then I remembered it.
I thought, there is Helen's tuna juice.
Yeah, and there go all my good pet owner points.
She's having trouble with the audio.
Are you guys getting an echo?
No, but Paul is breaking up. I can't hear her clearly.
Hi, Ray.
I'm getting messages that my internet is gonna be, I forgot what it just said. It's gonna have problems. It does that every so often.
When you need it, it will.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's bad lighting.
It's like it's okay. Dale is trying to join us. It's like I tell the kids at the library, I said, the printer knows if you're under stress. So, so if you need to print something, you know, it knows that you've got a deadline and it will act accordingly. So you need to center yourself and be at peace with yourself.
You know,
And show it good respect and pet it nicely.
Did that take care of the echo? I didn't hear that.
Dale's having a problem here. Okay. I got a message from Dave Etris, and they've got company tonight, so he won't be joining us. And I know Diane Hansen is winging her way to Colorado.
That's right. She's visiting her son. She was very excited about that on Sunday.
But all of the videos have been posted.
Obviously, she's not on.
Real audio issues here.
Boy, Helen keeps freezing.
Yeah.
Oh, she's back. You need to be careful of your facial expressions, Helen, because when it freezes, it usually freezes on like something really.
Well, I'm not surprised.
So how was your Sunday sermon?
Well, I think it was okay. So far, you know, everyone seems to be very accepting of what I've been bringing to them. So, you know, they're happy.
What did you preach on?
Well, the eye of the needle with the camel. And all
okay,
of that,
you did that. Okay. I
kind of formulated it as, you know, with the rich man having to make the choice, does he sell his stuff or not?
Mm-hmm.
And kind of the, you know, I asked a lot of questions and I didn't give any answers.
Well,
so I just kind of presented it that, you know, maybe this is something we need to think about.
So I don't know if you guys know, but Helen is a lay preacher. What church?
Newent Congregational Church in Lisbon.
Oh, okay. I thought it was a Methodist church.
No, it's congregational. The Methodist church is in Versailles, which is down the hill in the valley, closer to the river.
Okay. So we're going to let Dale, I know, is trying to join us, so we'll let her, and I haven't heard from Marty yet.
They weren't in church on Sunday. He's, I don't know.
It was a holiday weekend. Maybe people are away. It was kind of fun. Holiday weekend. Maybe we, you know, people were not in church yesterday.
Oh, how was attendance?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I forget. Well, I didn't look. I wasn't ushering, so.
Oh.
If I don't usher, I don't always look.
That's a good way to do it. You know, you don't get anxious over that. How's the lawn?
I nailed it on Thursday when Penny was giving blood. It worked out perfectly. But I said, Bob, I didn't get to the trimming. So he went back Saturday and played around with anything I missed.
Oh, well, he's got more nerve on that tractor than I do.
I didn't do the best job backing it into the shed.
Oh, that's.
I almost knocked over the paper. I mean, that's how bad it was.
Yeah.
We won't talk about that though. That's something you're going to let me know about someday.
So I always see Bob always goes up the hill, and I don't like going up the hill on a tractor because I know too many people that tipped over on those things.
Yeah, I like to do the community garden hill with the push mower.
Okay, here's the hill again. Let's see if we can get her this time. And there's Carol. Carol made it. Hi, Carol.
Okay, can you hear and see me? Yes. Okay,
Say hi to Rudy.
I will. I will.
I'm waiting for Dale Eichholz is having a hard time joining. So I've included your daughter on the email chain, Ellen.
Oh, okay, good. She appreciates that. You know, she knows she can't make it to the Zoom meeting, but she is going to be watching the recorded session.
Okay, good. All right. You know, I'm sure I probably met her when Mary was up in Brooklyn.
You probably did. Yes, her family was very active at St. John.
Yeah, I remember Herb.
Yeah, everybody remembers Herb.
Yeah. Herb is memorable.
And I'm afraid William has a lot of same characteristics as Herb's. Like when we go out to eat and the waitress says, "Well, is there anything else I can get you?" And he'll pipe up and say, "A winning lottery ticket."
Yeah, there's one in every crowd.
Yeah, yep. He has picked up that baton.
Yeah. Yeah, Mary's up there for well over a year.
Now, was that before? Who was the pastor that I remember?
Bob Blackard?
Oh gosh, Blackard, yes.
It was after.
It was after.
Yeah. She was the interim before Lisa.
Yep, yep. Yeah, that's a shame. You know, they sold St. John, bought another church building. And I think they were only in that church building 2 or 3 years, a relatively short time, and they sold that one too. So, you know, now I guess there is no Lutheran church out that way anymore.
Okay, Dale has joined us.
Yes, finally. I had a hard time connecting, but I'm with you.
Yay.
Okay, well, I think, well, being the holiday and all, maybe Marty is otherwise engaged, but so a couple of introductory things. First off, so tonight we're going to be doing 2 creation stories with Professor Cohen. And in the next lecture, we will then go back to Professor Hayes, who will talk about the Bible in its Near Eastern context. And on that note, one of the things I wanted to highlight or bring to your attention is if you look at the introduction to Genesis in the Hebrew Bible, in the Jewish Study Bible, on page 9, it has something I think what we should keep in mind as we listen to these narratives. It says, one aspect of narrative in Genesis that requires special attention is its high tolerance for different versions of the same event, a well-known feature of ancient Near Eastern literature from the earliest time through Rabbinic Midrash, which is about 2nd century CE. And then they go through, there's multiple accounts of many stories. So I think that's one of the things that we'll talk about, that Professor Cohen will talk about, is that at least one way to read Genesis is that there's 2 creation stories there. And then there will be multiple accounts of other events. For instance, we'll talk about Noah in a future lecture. So let's see, the other thing is the recordings, at least through the last lecture, are up. And I want to make sure we are recording. Okay. So, and I usually try to get the flash drive to Lee the day after, so he can put it up on and it's on the St. Luke YouTube page, which there's a link to that off of our website, where the other stuff about the Hebrew Bible course is. So I did hear from Professor Cohen on Penny's question. Unfortunately, he was occupied and couldn't answer right away. So, but hang on to that question, and
By the time I get the answer, I'll forget what I asked, but that's okay.
Oh, well, I emailed him the question so we can.
Okay.
So I may send it to Professor Hayes. Maybe she's not as busy. So he's retired, so he's probably busy.
Yeah.
Okay. So are there any questions before we start? Okay. Everybody hears me okay, right?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So let's go to sharing the screen. Then we share the sound. We share the screen. We shrink this down. And I'm going to mute your mics. Okay, if anybody has trouble, please either chat me, or I've got my cell phone next to me. You can text me if you've got any problems hearing it, or if there's anything, any difficulties.
Begin our discussion of these phenomenal, fantastic early stories in the book of Genesis. So, all modern Bible scholars agree that Genesis opens with not one, but two creation stories. Now, I need to say right away up front, if you are a traditionalist Jew or a traditionalist Christian, committed to the belief in the unitary composition of the Torah, you believe it was written by one person at one moment under divine inspiration or not, I'll leave that point aside, but it was composed by one mind at one moment in time, then of course you will disagree with what I just said and what I'm about to say for the rest of this lecture. You will say, what two accounts? There aren't two accounts, there's one account. I don't understand what you're talking about. Two chapters, yeah, chapter 1 and chapter 2. But that's not two accounts, it's just one story told in one way the first time, then told in a slightly different way the other time, but clearly they're meant to be complementary. That's a good thing you can do during section. With our section leaders, is to ask, is that a viable way to read Scripture? For many Jews and Christians, the answer is yes. However, we modern Bible scholars are convinced that the answer is no. We modern Bible scholars are convinced that a natural, simple, plain reading of the text, just read what it says and take it seriously for what it says, that we will discover that we seem to have two accounts, wherein the sequence differs and much of the content differs, and to some extent the style differs, leading us to the conclusion that we have two different creation accounts. I will come back to this fundamental problem in a moment. What are these two accounts? First account is Genesis chapter 1, and first a little bit of chapter 2. Whoever divided the chapters was not aware of the modern Bible scholarly division between two accounts, and consequently put the chapter division in the wrong place. So when I say chapter 1, I mean chapter 1 and the first little bit of chapter 2, and then when I say the second account, I mean the rest of chapter 2, and then onward. First creation account, the famous 7 days of creation, climaxing in the seventh day, which is the Sabbath. That's creation story number 1. Creation story number 2 is the climaxing in the creation of Eve, the story of Adam, Eve, and the apple. It wasn't really an apple, right? It was just a fruit. Right. Adam, Eve, the apple, the snake, and the Garden of Eden. And then the story continues from there. That's story number 2. As I'll discuss on Wednesday, that story, in which Adam and Eve are expelled from the Garden of Eden, is the first of a series of stories in these early chapters of Genesis, in which humanity rebels against God, rejects the divine mandate, or does something evil in the sight of God, and then consequences follow. We have a series of at least 4 of such episodes in these early chapters of Genesis, but we'll come back to that on Wednesday. So, let's begin. We have then not one, but 2 creation stories. Creation stories you find all over the world. You take your comparative mythology class, You'll find every peoples from the Aleuts to the Zulus and everybody in between, everybody has creation stories. Who doesn't have creation stories? Right, so there's nothing unusual in the Israelites also having not one, but two creation stories. Generally speaking, though, these creation stories, if you do a little comparative mythology, involve either copulation or battle. Where does the world come from? Either we have these two gods, God and goddess, there's some kind of divine copulation. After all, that's how we know how reproduction occurs. So presumably the world itself is born of the fruit of such a standard kind of act of production and reproduction. So the gods are either copulating or the gods are having a massive battle. There are dragons and massive fights between different teams of gods, and then the world emerges somehow out of the corpses of the losers, the winners, whatever. A whole set of variations. So copulation and battling. Class. Genesis chapter 1, Genesis chapter 2. Is there any divine copulation going on?
No.
No. Is there any divine battling going on? No. These two stories, although they're different from each other, are united in the fact that they are non-mythological. Right? They don't involve a story of the god. The gods are not doing anything except for the act of creation itself. But the Hebrew Bible preserves for us, it seems, relics, if that's the right word, or allusions to creation stories in which we do seem to have God, the true God, the one and only universal God, that God, not to be confused with other gods, where that God is engaged, indeed, not in copulation, but in battle. That the act of creation, it seems, in these passages strewn hither and thither in Scripture, we seem to have allusions to battle scenes of God taking on great sea monsters. And I gave you a bunch of these passages to look at, probably more than I should have. So I just want to look together with you at a couple of these, and also to learn how to teach you, to make sure we all know how to find our way in Scripture. So let's look at Isaiah 51:9. I'll translate here, that will be different from that one because I'm reading the Hebrew. So, arise, gird your strength, the arm of the Lord. Arise as you were in days of old, in generations of time, of eternal time. You are the one who, how's it translated there? Dug out, excavated, chopped. How does it say? Rahab. What's the verb? That's English? Hacked. Hacked is good. Right. You are the one who hacked Rahab, who pierced through or destroyed Tanin, dragon. Right? The poet, the prophet, is singing of God's divine might. Right? God's arm is so powerful that in times of yore, God destroyed, hacked, chopped, brutalized Rahab, and not to mention Rahab, but also Tanin in the next verse. And you are the one, you, second person feminine, addressing the arm of the Lord. You are the one who dried up Yam. Yam is the Hebrew word for sea. You dried up sea, right? The waters of the great deep. Tahom. Remember the word tahom. The abyss. We'll see that word in Genesis chapter 1 in just a moment. You are the one who dried up Yam, the waters of the great deep, who did something to the depths of the water, the path by which those who are redeemed will pass. What is that talking about? Moses, presumably the Exodus story, right? That the Exodus story, which if you don't know what this is, that's fine, we'll get there in a couple of weeks. The climax of the Exodus story, the Israelites leave the land of Egypt, which they had been enslaved. They passed through the waters, and God had dried up the sea before them so they could pass through on dry land. When they get to the other side, the waters return and destroy their enemies. Okay, and similarly then the prophet goes on to say, and those redeemed of the Lord shall return, shall come to Zion with singing. What is Zion? Zion is Jerusalem. Zion is the poetic name for Jerusalem. right? The poets don't like the word Jerusalem, they like the word Zion. They shall return to Zion in singing and with the great rejoicing on their heads, rejoicing and rejoicing and rejoicing. Okay. So what do we see in this passage? So the passage is singing about the great power of God, that God can hack down, strike down Rahav, Tanin, dragon, can dry up the sea. Right? God is in control of these elements, just as God did this of old. Similarly, and God did it for those redeemed from Egypt, so too understood the passage is saying, God will do it for those who are to return to Jerusalem, to Zion. This being written in the exilic period. I can mention that word casually, right? When is the exilic period? Exilic period, when is that? 587. Good. 587 BCE is the exile. What? Timeline. Turn back to your timeline. That's why we gave you a timeline. Lecture 2, you have a timeline. All right, it will sink in, but you got to work with me here on this. Right, the exilic period at 587 BC, the Israelites are exiled to, the Judeans are exiled to Babylon. Then they return from Babylon and rebuild the second temple in the late 6th century BCE. And we think Isaiah, the author of this chapter, of chapter 51 of Isaiah, is not the Isaiah of the 8th century BCE. We think he's an anonymous prophet who's living during the exilic period. Perhaps even in the Persian period. Wait, another one to remember. Persian period, Persian period, Persian period. End of the 6th century, 5th century BC. After the Babylonians come the Persians. We think he's alive in the Persian period. Maybe. Actually, that's debated. Either Babylonian or Persian period. Anyway, why am I telling you all this? Because here we have the prophet Isaiah singing of the great power of God. That God can take on Rahav, take on dragon, take on sea, just as God did so of old and won. Similarly, the prophet is suggesting God can take on Israel's depressed situation now and bring about redemption for the Judeans. Right? That's the meaning of this passage. So, class, who are these mysterious Rahav, dragon, and sea that God took on in battle and beat? Who are they? Where are they? Answer, we don't know, except that Scripture has like a dozen of these scriptural references scattered here, there, and there. I gave you a bunch on your syllabus to show that when biblical authors wax poetic, wax ecstatic about praising divine power, they often trot out Rahav. What is the word Rahav? I don't know. Seems to be some kind of monster. Primordial monster destroyed by the power of God in creation eons ago, as the prophet says. So, back to our lecture notes. So I won't go through all the passages, but hopefully you can at least look at a bunch of them and see. What they all have in common, they all are in the prophetic books or the book of Job. These are books of high poetry. So, what do we make of this class? Do we conclude from this that parallel to Genesis 1 and 2, there were circulating other creation accounts in ancient Israel, creation accounts that in fact are bloody stories of conquest and battle in which God takes on these monsters, beats them, destroys them, hacks them, and creates the world? Shall we conclude that, class? Or shall we say, hey, give me a break. It's a poet. It's poetry. He'll write all kinds of stuff. He's not writing a theological treatise. He's not writing a theological tractate on the creation of the world, right? Or the origins of evil, or any such things. Give me a break. Yeah, he knows that there are stories out there. Every literate person knows there are stories out there. And the prophet, of course, alludes to them for his prophetic imagination or imagining of God and divine power. How to actualize that in speech. One way is to poetry. God hacked Rahab. Do I believe that God really hacked Rahab? Of course not. It's poetry. Give me a break. Oh, good. Yes, Matt.
How do we know that Rahab and the dragon are not names to refer to someone like Satan?
Good question. Well, if you are a cosmic dualist, right? In which you are convinced that the reason this world is such a lousy place is because it's under the control of demons, elements, powers, and the rest, all trotted out by Paul in various passages, right? If you believe that, then you might say, aha, I know who Rahab and Tanin and Yam are. They are old man Satan dressed up in different guises, right? Locked in this eternal cosmic struggle with God, the principle of good, the principle of justice. And it's very possible there is some kind of connection, right? That through subterranean memory, these Rahab and monsters, the opponents of God in the act of creation, maybe do feed in later, centuries later, into a cosmic dualist view of the world. I don't exclude that. However, I think in terms of ancient Israelite theology, I think the burden of proof would be upon you to demonstrate that there is a connection between these views, and I don't think you'll find it. Sorry, I don't think you'll find evidence for it. So it's not impossible, nothing's impossible, but not likely in the absence of evidence. The cosmic dualist view of the world, in which this world is seen to be the province of the domain of evil forces, such that we need to escape and to make sure our allegiance is with the good God, the powers of light, the powers of truth, etc. That view you find in ancient Judaism, but you got to wait a while. It's probably the last centuries BCE, just before the emergence of Christianity in the first century CE, that you will find that view attested very clearly in Jewish texts. Probably because the standard view of reward and punishment has been exhausted. The standard view of divine control of the world, which I spoke about last time, right? That view simply ran out of steam. It clearly is not working. And all the tweaking you can do, at the end of the day, it doesn't work. That takes, that's down the road a piece still. But you have to, but it's an interesting thing to think about, these mysterious passages about Rahab and Tanin who take on God in battle and lose.
Do we know anything about the historical lives of the prophets?
There is about historical lives of the prophets, only insofar as they tell us. We'll talk about prophets in several weeks down the road. So this mysterious anonymous prophet, the author of Isaiah chapter 51, we modern scholars say he's not the same as the first Isaiah. The author of Isaiah chapter 1 through 39 is not the same as the author of chapter 40 through 66. We know that because we modern scholars are very smart and have convinced ourselves of this fact. But having said that, we don't have a name, we don't have a biography, we don't have a social setting, we don't have nothing. We don't know anything. Later, Jews and Christians will feel a lacuna in the lives of the prophets, and there is a book that was written in the Byzantine times called Lives of the Prophets, in which they make up all kinds of great stories and burial places for the prophets, because it seems unseemly we have these great men of God, and yet we don't know anything about them. But they don't know anything about 2nd Isaiah. That's something which the Byzantine book doesn't know. In brief, the answer is no, unless they tell us. So, Genesis chapter 1 and chapter 2 don't have that exciting story of God taking on Rahab and dragon and sea and beating them to bits, chopping them to bits, or drying them up, or whatever. We have instead a very different set of accounts. But even here, if we look carefully, we can perhaps see that the author is aware of these other accounts, or is writing with deliberate opposition to those accounts. So everybody points to those mysterious opening verses of Genesis. Genesis chapter 1 and Genesis chapter 1, verses 1 and 2, which is traditionally translated, "In the beginning God created heaven and earth." But all modern translations, I didn't check all, I checked a bunch, right? There's general consensus among modern Bible scholars that that's an incorrect translation. It should be understood to be "in the beginning, comma, when God created da 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 da, then God da 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 da." So it's a long, complicated sentence rather than a short, simple sentence. "In the beginning, God created heaven and earth." That's probably not the way to translate the opening verse. Anyway, my point here is that chapter 1, so verse 1 is in the beginning, or when God began to create heaven and earth, comma. Now comes verse 2. "And the earth was tohu and bohu." I don't know, translate that. The earth was tohu and bohu, and there was darkness upon the deep. Tahom, the same word Isaiah used. We read a moment ago in chapter 51 about Rahab. The same word, tahom. And the darkness was over the deep. And the wind, or the spirit of the Lord, was fluttering upon the water. To which my only response can only be, what? What are all these things, and where did they come from? This will spawn enormous speculation by later Jews and Christians, that we have a creation, but the creation, there's stuff there already. There is the land, there is darkness, there is the abyss, there is the wind or spirit of the Lord, and then there is this water. What is all that stuff? Where does it come from? I don't know. But I do know that ancient Jews and Christians were much intrigued by verse 2, understanding where these things come from. So the reference, though, to the waters and to Tahom, reminds me of those things we just read about God taking on the waters and God taking on the deep. Similarly, chapter 1, verse 21, we have dragons are mentioned on the 5th day of creation. Right? It says God creating all the fish, 5th day the fish, and including it says, Vayivra Elohim et hataninim hagedolim, and God created the mighty dragons. Why does Scripture single that out? Probably because the author wants you to know, I know about those stories about those dragons, and trust me, they don't got any content. They're nothing. God created the dragons like everything else, period. Then we have this mysterious plural in Genesis chapter 1, verse 26 that already was asked about. What's going on there? Is this a relic of, again, some mythological account of many gods at work? Or what? The standard explanation is, this is, as I've already mentioned, this is God talking to his royal court. No king does anything all by himself. Kings always have officers and ministers galore. So similarly, God, at the climax of creation, Genesis chapter 1, right, is about to create Adam. So God doesn't do it by himself. God has assistants, an army of assistants, like any king, worthy of his name. So it's also not mythological. Maybe. Later Jews and Christians will say this is God talking to the angels. It's a small problem with that. Where are the angels? Where do they come from? When are they created? Answer, they're not. They're omitted by Genesis chapter 1 and 2. There are no angels being created. So how does God create Adam with angels? There aren't any angels yet. They have to posit that the angels come from somewhere else, but then you're in trouble. So I'm not sure what to do. Maybe this is also a relic of some more complicated mythological account. When we turn to Genesis chapter 2, we don't really have mythology here. We'll talk about that in a second. We seem to have, as Kugel says, folklore relics. With magic trees and talking snakes. It sounds like folklore to me, more so than, let's say, the mythology. But we'll go back to that snake, if not today, then next time. A crucial point in both Genesis chapter 1 and Genesis chapter 2, God is by himself. Except for chapter 1, verse 26, that mysterious plural, God is acting entirely on his own in both accounts. In the first account, the name used for God is Elohim, which seems to be a plural form, and indeed, in some passages in Scripture, Elohim, it governs a plural verb, and seems to be the translation, we would translate that as gods in some passages. But in most passages, in fact the vast majority, Elohim, even though it looks like a plural noun, governs a singular verb. It's a singular thing. It's a singular thing, but it's also a masculine thing. The verb that Elohim governs is always masculine. Small footnote. In English, you can't tell gender by a verb. English is relatively ungendered language, which explains why you can have egalitarian theology in English. if you're thinking in Hebrew, it's very hard to have egalitarian theology because Hebrew is a highly gendered language. Nouns, verbs, everything is gendered. It's either masculine or feminine. There's no neuter in Hebrew either, as in some languages. Like Greek has masculine, feminine, and neuter. Hebrew only has masculine and feminine. Everything's either masculine or feminine. It's all binary. Everything is gendered. So the noun for God is not only a singular noun, it's also a masculine noun. It raises the interesting question, if God is masculine from the point of view of grammar, is God also male? And if God is male, then of course, the next question is, well, where is the female? So people scour the scriptures looking for evidence that once upon a time the ancient Israelites thought that God had a female consort. The evidence for that, as you might suspect, is disputed, tricky, mysterious, hard to interpret. We have to look outside the Bible for references, notably some inscriptions, which maybe, as one book put it, God has a wife. The important point is in Genesis chapter 1 and Genesis chapter 2, God is masculine, God is singular, but there is no feminine deity consort anywhere in sight, nor are there any other gods anywhere in sight. That's what we mean when we say this account is non-mythological. There are no stories about this God, he just is. Okay, this is by way of a little background. Yes, Matt.
Question from the anonymous Jewel.
Good.
You've used the words folklore relic and mythological relic. Is there a difference?
Yes, I'm using them differently. I guess I should take Mythology 101 to work out my theoretical basis for this distinction, which I never did. But by mythology, I mean specifically stories about the gods. When we tell mythology, then, you know, Zeus and Apollo one day did X. Right? Marduk one day did Y. There was a great battle between Ge and Saturn. You have stories about the gods. That's typically what I mean by mythology. Ancient Israel has no mythology. Or if it is, it's lost. Except for these fragments like God takes on Rahab. God takes on the sea. And there's a battle. Well, that's a story about God. Otherwise, all the stories about God in the Israelite scriptures, the Hebrew Bible, are God acting with humans, judging, talking, giving laws, revelation, and the rest. But God himself has no story. There's no birth, there's no death, there are no battle scenes, no nothing. I call that mythology. Folklore are all kinds of motifs we see typically in stories from nations throughout the world, again, from the Aleuts to the Zulus, everybody in between. We have all kinds of interesting stories about, remarkable stories about nature. So in Genesis chapter 2 and 3, we have these mysterious trees in the Garden of Eden, these magic trees. We have a talking snake. These are typical motifs of folklore. The issue here is not true and false. Don't confuse this. That's not the category. I'm not saying mythology is a way of saying something is false. No, I'm not saying that at all. It's not what we mean. But mythology are sacred stories about the gods. That's mythology. Yes, sir.
Is there any concept of the royal we in like Israel this time?
Well, yeah, that's how people try to get also explain chapter 1, verse 26. God is getting very royal, first person plurally, when he's creating Adam. Everything else he can do without the first person plural. But he gets to Adam, you know, the climax of the creative process, God now shifts to the royal we. Does this ancient Hebrew have a royal we? Not really. But, well, yeah, it does. Chapter 1, verse 26 of Genesis. It's right there. I don't know. I don't think so. But interpreters have suggested that too. Good. All right, let's do other questions. Okay, let's do a little compare and contrast these two creation accounts, just so we can see if they in fact are, well, complementary, different, contradictory, whatever word we think is appropriate. Chapter 1, first creation account, attributed by modern Bible scholars to this mysterious entity called P. And we'll talk more about that. God creates the world through speech. The main verb uses speech. God says, let something be, and lo and behold, it is. So the creative power of God is manifest in divine speech. That's Genesis chapter 1. Another interesting motif in Genesis chapter 1 is separation. The world is chaos, and God imposes order by separating that which is mumble-jumbled together and needs to be separated to make distinct. God makes distinct what previously is indistinct. That's the motif we see especially in the early days of creation, separating light from dark, separating the waters above from the waters below. These are acts of separation. Last but not least, in chapter 1 we have a mysterious verb, bara in Hebrew. This verb appears elsewhere in Scripture, but wherever this verb appears, God is always the subject. You and I don't do bara. That's God. God does bara. You and I do all kinds of other things. We can chop, cut, fashion, sand, file, drill. We can do all kinds of verbs, right? But we don't do bara. Only God does bara. Put it together, chapter 1 seems to have a rather, sometimes we call it a philosophical view of God, in which the act of creation clearly is not akin to the act that you and I take a block of wood and make something out of it. Nothing like that at all. It's completely different. Whereas chapter 2 is very much the divine craftsman, the divine carpenter, the divine carver, right? God takes, with the creation of Adam, he takes some mud, puts it together, blows air into it, and poof, the creature comes alive. Which is it seems completely different in conception from what we have in chapter 1. We call chapter 1 philosophical, abstract. Chapter 2 is very much God as divine carpenter, the divine artisan, right? Putting the world together. There's no creation through speech. There's no mysterious verb bara, and there's none of this philosophical stuff. Is this a contradiction, class? No, it's not a contradiction. Are they different? Yes, they're different. The God of chapter 2, whom we attribute to this mysterious source called J, and we'll come back to these things many times, is anthropomorphic. I said he's a divine carpenter. Presumably he walks and talks, he does things. I guess he has hands and arms. That's how he makes things, right? He is anthropopathic. He has the same emotions as humans, as we'll discover in subsequent chapters. This God gets angry. This God can be happy. It's hard to imagine the God of chapter 1 being angry. I'm not sure what to imagine that God of chapter 1. It's hard to imagine what that God is. Whereas in chapter 2, this God is like a human, only infinitely more powerful. But fundamentally a humanoid, or anthropomorphic, anthropopathic in chapter 2. First creation story. The great climax is the Sabbath. It ends with 6 days of creation, and God rests on the 7th. Presumably, as Kugel talks about this, presumably the implied message here is that maybe you too should observe the Sabbath. Since God sanctified the day and made it holy, then I guess it's a good thing that you too should rest on the 7th day. So that seems to be the, quote, point of the first creation story, an endorsement of the Sabbath day. And indeed we find that in the 10 Commandments, in Exodus chapter 20. Right? 7 days you shall labor, 6 days you shall labor, and the 7th day you shall rest, because the Lord your God created the world. That seems to be the theory of Genesis chapter 1. Genesis chapter 2, the second account, has no reference to the Sabbath at all. It seems to have as its point not the endorsement of the Sabbath, but it's an etiological tale, or etiology. What is etiology? This. Right, etiology is a story, logos, theory, doctrine, rationale of etios. Etios in Greek means, or itia in Greek means responsibility. The etiological tale is a tale that explains to you why things are the way they are. That's an etiology, etiological tale. It explains the origins of things, why things are the way they are. So, the story in chapter 2, which leads into the story of chapter 3, the expulsion from the garden, which we'll talk about more next time, there's a series of explanations. Why is it so hard to make a living? Why is childbirth for women so difficult? Why are women subservient to their husbands? That's written by someone who thinks women are subservient to their husbands. Why snakes don't have feet? Why humans wear clothes? Why men desire women? Well, these are interesting questions. Well, this story in chapter 3, which we'll talk about next time, right, which is in turn a continuation of the story in chapter 2, right, explains all these things to you, these mysteries of the world. Why are things this way? Why aren't things some other way? How come animals give birth with so little pain and suffering? How come animals seem to support themselves without working so hard? They don't have to get undergraduate degrees and then graduate degrees and then, spend internships and fellowships galore. They just go out and eat. How come? Why is it so much more difficult for us? Well, the story explains it. We'll come back to it. Don't worry, we'll come back to this. So this is an etiological tale. Chapter 1 has no etiologies except insofar as the Sabbath. Chapter 2 explains all kinds of things about the way the world is. Last but not least, the major contrast, of course, is where we put Adam. First man, primordial human, right? Where is Adam? How do we understand who or what Adam is? In the first creation story, chapter 1, Adam comes on day 6. Right? This is the end point. Right? All of creation is pointing towards this moment, right, of God creating humans. And humans, of course, are said to be created in the image of God. Whatever that means exactly, endlessly disputed by interpreters. What exactly does that mean? The key point, though, is humans come at the climax of creation in the image of God, unlike all other creatures that God has created. Only humans are in the image of God. This represents the climactic endpoint of the creative process, followed by the Sabbath. In chapter 2, we have no reference to image of God. And Adam, it seems, if we read the sequence straight along, seems to be created at the very beginning. And after God creates Adam, then God creates all kinds of other creatures, brings them to Adam. Adam gives them names. So again, another etiological tale. Where do these names come from? Answer, they come from Adam, right? And then Adam tries them all out and sees that none of them is a suitable companion. That's when God gets the bright idea. Okay, I guess I'll have to create something new, and I'll create woman. That's where women come from. Right? So the first woman comes out of Adam, even though all subsequent human beings come out of woman. Right? But the first woman herself comes out of Adam. That's chapter 2. Chapter 1 has none of that. Chapter 1 instead has, on this gender question, an extraordinarily cryptic and difficult verse, where it says that God created Adam in his image. In the image of God, he created them. So now I'm completely confused. Adam, one person, two persons, or as some ancient interpreters thought, this was a hermaphroditic person. A hermaphrodite, right? Half male, half female, or somehow male, female blended together, which subsequently gets separated. Remember separation, Genesis chapter 1, separation. So it's not an absurd rendering, an absurd possibility, but the key point here is that in chapter 1, Adam emerges as human, climax at the end of creation, male and female. Chapter 2, Adam is male. Adam looks around, sees there's no suitable companion for himself, and then God creates woman, Eve, out of Adam. Put it together. Are these contradictory accounts? Well, yeah, if you want to push this pretty hard, I would say we have a contradiction here. Is Adam at the beginning, Adam at the end? Is Adam male and female, or is Adam male only? Right? Is Adam the image of God or not? So these are, seems to be inconsistent accounts. Have no fear, our ancient Jewish and Christian readers found ways to reconcile all this, but they have to labor very hard. Surely, that's an important word for Shaye Cohen. Surely means I'm not sure at all. Surely means I'm making it up. Surely means I have no evidence at all, but I'm covering my nakedness by saying surely. Surely, it is much simpler to say we have two parallel, separate accounts which are simply inconsistent with each other. Okay, last big point. Here I'm going to end with a point with which I'll begin on Wednesday. Why does the Torah begin with this material, these stories? The creation story of chapter 1, the creation story of chapter 2, Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, chapter 3, Cain and Abel, chapter 4, right? As we move ahead, then genealogies, and then the flood story in chapter 5 and 6, and so on. Moving ahead into the flood, chapter 6, 7. These are not simply told as stories because they're great stories. You know, from the point of view of stories, these are great stories. No, the point of that is to emphasize that there is a God, and if there is a God, it means the Bible is saying there is also a moral order, which is one of the big points of the Hebrew Scriptures as a whole. The creation story serves not simply to glorify divine power, which it does, not simply to explain how things are the way they are, which it does, but also helps to explain that there is a demand for righteousness. The world is not a chaotic assemblage of this and that. Rather, there is a moral order which is built into the cosmos, which is one of the big points of the Hebrew Scriptures. And when the other places in the Bible allude to the creation, this is almost always the point which we are trying to make. The fact that God is a creator God and that the world is his creation means that the world stands in some moral relationship with God. Okay, my time's really up. I will pick up on this point on Wednesday, and we'll continue to look at the other stories, opening stories in the book of Genesis.
Sorry. Okay, so everybody is able to be unmuted. Did it come through okay?
Yes.
I know there was a little hung up at the beginning there.
Yeah, it was a very interesting session.
Okay, so I guess one question is the notion of reading the, what does it do to your understanding of the creation stories to understand them as two separate stories rather than a unitary whole? I mean, does that influence your view of it in any way?
I've always thought the second story was ridiculous. Mm-hmm. I've always thought the second story was ridiculous. So I already knew they were two stories, and I liked the first one, and the second one is like, okay, fine. Snake, whatever. That's a fairy tale. It's just a...
Okay. So you sort of, so did you sort of see them as two stories early on?
Oh yeah. To me, you just can't put them together. They, they make no sense. There's very little. I'm pleased that he pulled out a couple of things they have in common, but virtually nothing.
Yeah.
I like the image of God as a craftsman in the second one, whereas the first is philosophical, and that the point of the two stories is different. That the first one is emphasizing God's power,
and promoting the Sabbath. And the second one is why things are the way they are. I liked that expression.
I don't know, the snake, the tree.
That's next week, Penny.
Yeah.
Wait till we get to the donkey, the talking donkey.
Oh yeah, I remember that too. Never liked Paul part of that particularly either.
I'm going to leave, folks. Have a good evening.
We'll see you later, Dale.
Yeah.
All right, bye.
Because I remember we talked about this when we were talking about care of creation, but the one of the things in the stories is that in the, I think it's the second story, focuses on the how God gave, let's see, really God gave the earth to man to care for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, you could wax on quite a bit about the implications of the word stewardship. That we're supposed to be stewards, or we were appointed as stewards.
Right.
And it gets back to created in God's image. What does that mean? Well, it means that we have a role as stewards beyond our species. We had a whole, Carol, do you remember we had a whole women's retreat on this?
Okay. Okay, I'll take your word for it, Penny.
That must have been interesting.
I thought so.
It was at the time.
So one of the things we'll talk about next week, and that Professor Hayes will talk about, is that we'll talk about some of the other creation stories that were prevalent in the Near East. One I found actually, I learned this from Joseph Campbell years ago, is there's a creation story. This is from the Basari people. Has anybody ever heard this? It's from Africa and Senegal. According to this, so Onumbate is the god of the Basari people. And in it, Onumbate creates man, then the animals, including the antelope and a snake, and later a woman. He gave the human seeds, and they grew trees and plants, including one bearing red fruit. Onumbate would eat from the tree every 7 days, but the humans would not. Eventually, the snake persuaded the humans to eat from the tree, explaining to Onumbate that they were hungry. Onumbate thus gave each of the creatures food to eat, and humans had cultivated plants, and the antelope had grass, but the snake was given poison and a desire to attack humans. So now I've never heard any explanation for that story other than it was independent of, you know, the Hebrew scripture, but it sure sounds a lot like it.
Yeah. And where did that come from?
It's, well, I heard it Joseph Campbell back in the 80s. He read it on a TV show I listened to. And it was, he collected world mythologies and stuff.
What country is that from though? Or what?
Oh, Senegal.
Senegal.
So as like Cohen says, everybody has different creation stories. I know the Native Americans had all sorts of them. So that one was always just sort of struck me.
Snake gets in trouble again.
Yeah, it always ends up bad for the snake, actually. Yeah. But again, maybe there's some cultural, you know, some sort of recessed thing about snakes in people, you know. So, any other questions or thoughts? Okay. All right. With that, I'll say good night, and we will see you next week. And if anybody has any questions or any comments, feel free to send me an email or a text, and we'll try to address them. And enjoy the rest of your week.
Thank you, Mitch. Next week.
Good night.
Good night, everyone.